House Committee on Natural Resources and Tourism will come to order. Will the clerk please take the attendance?
Chair Martin.
Here.
Representative St. Germain.
Here.
Vanderwall.
Present.
Outman.
Here.
Hoadley.
Here.
Johnson.
Present.
Preston.
Yes.
Bonack.
Here.
Fairbairn.
Here.
Wortz.
Here.
McFall.
Here.
Scott.
Here.
Weiss.
Here.
Arbit. Foreman. Myers Phillips. Wooden. Mr. Chair, you do have a quorum.
Thank you. Representative Altman makes a motion to approve the minutes for a previous meeting. The minutes are approved by unanimous consent. We're now going to take up House Bill 4445, sponsored by Representative Wortz. Representative, please come forward and present your legislation.
Well, good afternoon. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Committee, for taking the time to hear my testimony. This is legislation that I actually introduced at the very beginning of my term here, and it was recommended to me by a former sheriff in Hillsdale County that I fix the deer baiting issue in Michigan, which began to do some research on, and would just like to share with you some of the statistics and the challenges that we face, particularly in my district, with a huge overpopulation of deer. In southern Michigan, over the last 40 years, the deer population has increased by about 5 times, from 200,000 to 1 million deer. Near my home this time of year, it's not uncommon to drive by a 40-acre farm field and see 20 or more deer. In fact, last Christmas, I looked out the window in our kitchen into the field just to the north of us. There was at least 20, if not 30 to 40, all in a herd. And I opened the door to go take a picture, and then they all proceeded to run across a road, which is a pretty heavily trafficked road. It's the main thoroughway in and out of Quincy, south and northbound. So to say that that adds other issues I'll get into later with also auto accidents in our community. Michigan has the second highest deer population of any state in the country, only behind Texas. And I'd like to point the significance of that out. Texas in land is 3 times the size of the state of Michigan. So we have 2 million, where Texas has a deer population of 5.3 million, but their state is 3 times larger in land mass than it is to Michigan. According to the DNR, about 35 to 40% of the herd must be harvested annually to maintain a stable deer population. In 2023, approximately 17 to 20% of the estimated population in Michigan was harvested by hunters. So about half of the harvest size that's needed. And that's continued to be an issue as we've moved forward in recent years as well. Michigan license sales have dropped from 871,865 in 1995 to about 594,348 in 2023, representing a decrease of over 30%. Hunters reported taking 2,870,664 deer in 2024 hunting season, which was a slight increase, 5% more from 2023, but then there was a decrease in 2020. So it kind of washes out the increase. Since 1995, the number of registered hunters in the state has decreased by approximately 32%, from 800,000 to 600,000. Thanks to new hunts and extended seasons, Michigan's 2024 deer harvest increased 5% from the previous year, but more action continues to be needed. And I'll just tell you, we've filed crop damage permits for the first time this last year, which was helpful. We took 6 deer on our property, but when you have a crop damage permit, you have to do that during the hottest season of the year, which is August, September. It was also happened to be during our fair season, or our fair week, which is also for rural farm families, usually tends to be the most busiest time of the summer for you. And so with very limited time out in the field, we were still able to take 5 or 6 deer. But on opening day, my son shot 4 deer, And a few weeks later, my mother-in-law called and said, why don't you come back? There's 8 more deer out here in the yard. But at that point, hunting season was over. So the opportunity is still great in our community for the need for more deer to be harvested. Last thing I'd like to highlight is auto accidents. American Automobile Association said Michigan had almost 59,000 deer-related crashes in 2023. 2024 report estimates 55,000 deer vehicle collisions per year in the state. We were driving home on election night of 2020 from my parents. It was my dad's birthday, and a deer ran into the side of our vehicle, totaling it entirely. All the airbags deployed, made it undrivable, and the damage obviously led to totaling it. Hillsdale County, in my district, roughly 1/3 of accidents, that's where that deer auto accident happened that I mentioned, 1/3 of accidents in 2024 were vehicle deer collisions. And while we were waiting for the officer to come, she said, "You're my 3rd car deer accident of the night." Unfortunately, deer accidents don't just affect people in that vehicle, but it drives all of our auto insurance costs up because we're a no-fault insurance state. Crop damage. I had an individual that was planning to attend today, but due to illness was unable to make it. But the amount of crop damage that is happening in our community is rampant, and the cost to farmers is very great. Crop damage causes millions of dollars every year in Michigan, making deer the most expensive farm pest in the state. Patrick and Mark Keyes in Hillsdale County have a 3,000-acre cash crop farm in Allen, just 11 miles from the Indiana-Michigan border. They apply Hinder on 160 acres of soybeans. The deer deterrent costs them $41 per gallon to cover the soybean field. It costs the Keyes roughly $21 per acre in application. At one of their 24-acre soybean fields, they've watched helplessly as their 70-bushel yields of soybeans drop to 15 to 20 bushels an acre, costing them thousands of dollars in revenue that they simply cannot afford to lose. Lastly, I'd like to highlight that DNR chose not to attend today. I wish they would have been here to present their side of the case to the committee. As you can see, they did send written testimony. They claim that this bill would undermine the authority of NRC to regulate baiting. This is not true. My bill does nothing to stop the NRC from regulating baiting based on sound scientific practices. It only prohibits them from banning it altogether. My bill actually allows for baiting during deer season, is what it states in the bill. The law has many requirements that Natural Resource Commission has to abide by. The NRC can't raise the cost of a deer tag, for example. DNR supported Senate Bill 276 just a few months ago, which would have invalidated current NRC orders banning deer and elk baiting. If they'd like to come to the table and work towards a compromise and a solution, my door is always open. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. First of all, I have to ask, you said you had a main thoroughfare through Quincy?
Yes.
Okay. I
There's
just
a
making
traffic
sure.
jam in Quincy every morning. School is in session.
Just checking. So, does your bill, is it purely for baiting, doesn't address feeding? Is there a difference?
It legalizes deer baiting.
Because, in my humble opinion, as far as science goes, we could increase the number of hunters. It's just my belief. There's no data because it's not there. That if we had baiting and somebody could go out on a weekend and harvest a deer on a weekend and have a good chance of being successful, we'd probably have more hunters again. Especially if we allowed them to do that without being, bothering them too much in the field. Also, if we increase the number of deer taken, and baiting helps that, if the science is that the deer are congregating too much and spreading disease, then the solution is to decrease the amount of deer so they don't congregate and have the disease spread. So we have to do something to take more deer, and anything we can to do that. The Deer Management Initiative, the one group we had in here gave testimony, is doing the same thing in farmers' fields because there's some farm fields, the cost of putting the combine in the field is too costly for what the amount of harvest they're going to get out of that field.
Absolutely.
So these things have to be addressed. I agree with you that it just saying that you can't ban it completely. I'm all for, for example, the USDA controls the area up in Mount Morenci Alpena area that has tuberculosis with farm animals, and as long as we can control that, because it's maintained between 1% and 2% transmission anyway, so whether we have baiting or not, it's still been, before baiting there was a 1 to 2% transmission, and then today there's still 1 to 2% transmission, even with a baiting ban. So I'm not going to address. We can protect that area because the USDA has to control it, but it still shows that the transmission rates really haven't changed that much because of baiting alone. So we do have to harvest more deer. Representative Altman.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Representative Wortz, for testifying on your bill. The Chair touched on my question a little bit, but did you have conversations with the DNR when you were working through this process?
We did. We had a meeting in the office with them and talked through some things and some of their concerns. I actually thought they would be here today.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of surprised.
Okay. And I was just curious, in your conversations that you had with the Department of Natural Resources, and I know they don't set the baiting ban. That is set by the NRC, per Prop G back in the 90s. But they support the ban in place. And I guess my question is, and you touched on this as well, in terms of crop damage, and when deer are, destroying our crops, they are nose to nose. They're grazing over the same areas that other deer have grazed. And so what is the DNR's rationale between, the bait piles versus what occurs in, their natural, naturally, and what occurs naturally in nature, I guess, is what I'm trying to get at.
Well, thank you for that question. I think one of the concerns is a cost factor. Is there going to be some sort of a license that we could put on baiting? That's not included in my bill. I wasn't interested in doing that at this point in time. To add to your point, I've sent many pictures to the chair on this issue all summer long. Our son raised pumpkins this year and last year, and you can walk out and they're all congregated together. They go down and drink from the lake or the stream together. They are a herd type animal. They exist together. So to think that if we ban baiting, that's going to fix a disease is like saying a 5-year-old going to kindergarten isn't going to get a cold. It's impossible. They are creatures of habit and creatures that exist together. It's just that's the way that God designed them. And so it's not reduced. And I've got someone that will be testifying a little bit from Michigan State University. And as you can see, there was written testimony submitted by Farm Bureau as well, Michigan Farm Bureau. And, it's not really reduced any disease. All it's done is increase crop damage because they're going to find the easiest source of food somewhere and consume it.
Right, and I would agree with it. I guess my question is, do they acknowledge that, or do they totally dispute that? I mean, what is their rationale when you had that discussion with them?
Vague. That would be their rationale.
We might get some information on overpopulation here in a minute with other testimony. The baiting and nose-to-nose transmission is different than the hemorrhagic, the CWD, anything that could be in the soil. So the overpopulation spreads it more over the soil. It's not necessarily that they get it from the food itself. So we do have to look at just the density of the population more than looking at the the contraction of the disease per se. Because if we can decrease the density, then the soils won't be as contaminated. Because I was wondering how Genesee County ended up with the first CWD when the adjoining counties don't have it. And some other animal, some other process could have brought it into the soil, and then that deer picked it up. So it's not, there's things we have to do for the density, not just the nose-to-nose type thing that we keep talking about with baiting. So that's why it comes up. Why is baiting a problem when we could harvest more deer and make it more successful hunters on the weekends that don't have as much time? With inflation and so forth, they're out there trying to make a buck to pay for their groceries, and going out deer hunting has become a luxury. And if we can make it enjoyable and successful, maybe we can take more deer.
Can I add one more
Sure.
thought to answer your question, Rep. Outman? I find it strikingly odd that they submitted this letter when, again, they supported Senate Bill 276, which is pretty much the same thing as my legislation here. So I'm not really sure. I'm also perplexed as to, other than what they stated in the letter, what their concerns are.
And I should also comment, just for the record's sake, that NRC will take up their new hunting
Guidelines.
rules in the spring. Vice Chair McFall.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Representative. My question actually might be for the next person, because I just wanted to understand more of the science behind it, because to me, whether they're congregating at bait or at your kids' pumpkins, like, of course, I'm also not an animal scientist, so I don't understand. So I would just I'd just like to have a better understanding of the science behind their decision as to being against it, I guess. So I kind of wish they were here as well. But I can just wait, I guess, until the next person comes up.
Yeah, I think the testimony from the doctor at MSU might give you a little more clarification on some of those
Okay, thank you.
things you're looking for, yeah.
Yeah, it should also be noted that anywhere in the state you can plant a food plot and hunt over the food plot, but you can't bait. Of course, it takes a little more effort. And the one thing I mentioned about feeding is I don't want to attract a tract of land where somebody focuses on attracting deer and takes away from their neighbors. I want their neighbors to have the same enjoyment of potential of deer hunting as anybody else. So I don't want feeding definition to interfere with attracting from others to enjoy the sport and surrounding properties.
Well, I think what I was thinking was more the transmission.
Yeah.
That's what I was thinking about is the science.
Well, when you, like she said, even in Genesee County, I'll drive between sand cranes and sandhill cranes and deer. You hardly can see the field, and geese. The field's covered with animals. So, Representative Weiss.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your testimony. And you touched on this, and I just want to make sure just a clarification question. You talked about conversations with the DNR. Did you also have conversations with members of the NRC as well?
I did not talk to the NRC directly.
Okay, because my main concern here is that, I do think that it is a legitimate concern that this is currently under their purview in terms of making this decision, and don't have concerns about superseding their authority. And I wonder too, where they specifically would be at if they are, as the chair suggested, going to be potentially revising their rules in the spring, if they're already potentially looking at doing this, or what their thoughts are. I would like to hear more directly from members from the NRC about that as well. And then I did have one other follow-up question that might sound a little off the wall. But I know that in the past, before my time here in the legislature, there was debate around a program at the time. I believe that the city of Ann Arbor had applied to the DNR for a waiver to be able to trap and spay and neuter their deer. And this became very controversial. And at the time, the legislature passed a law to prohibit their ability to get a permit to do that. And I just flagged that I know your bill is specifically around baiting and hunting, but particularly in areas like mine where I live, that are extremely densely populated, where we do not want people hunting deer, but where there are deer that could potentially cause accidents and fatalities. It seems like a good potential solution to be able to help manage the population. I just wondered if you had come across any of that in researching your bill, and if you had any thoughts on that.
I've actually heard of that idea, and I didn't know. I guess I thought actually that the city of Ann Arbor was doing some work in that.
I'll double check, but my understanding is that they had in the past, but that the legislature kind of preempted their ability to do that by legislation, and I might be wrong on that, but that's my understanding.
I know there's a definite cost factor there, and I believe Representative Markkinen had a solution for that too. Representative Vanderwall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative, for bringing this forward. A couple things. First off, I'm going to address Representative Weiss. I actually chaired that committee that put the ban in for Ann Arbor because of the expense, and there was no proof that because one buck will travel 7 miles to impregnate a doe if she's in heat, and to neuter doe or to sterilize a buck was very expensive, and there was no science that proved that it actually slowed the population. So we did ban that, and I served as chair on that committee. But also in 2019, we worked very, very tirelessly on a package that came out of the House at that time by Representative Hodinga, which is the same one, I believe, that's on Senate Bill 276. I was in the Senate at the time, and we worked with scientists, the DNR, and actually inside that bill placed some pretty stiff stipulations on how many gallons of bait could be used and what it needed to be spread, so that wasn't just put in one mass pile. It had to be spread over 400 square feet. It couldn't be any more than 5 gallons of bait at a given time. Curious on your thoughts of looking at some of the bait restriction and lines of how much can be dumped at one time and in one location. As everybody on this committee knows, I'm a huge and avid outdoor person, and actually now to get around baiting on my property, I'm fortunate enough that I go in and till up a section of land and put in food plots, which aren't considered baiting. And they're large food plots, and I will tell you, deer do congregate in one side. They're a social animal, and they're with each other. So I fully support what you are. I do believe that we need to look at some option on some square footage and amount that can be dumped at any given time, and would love to hear your opinion on that.
Yeah, thank you for that background information too. I'm open to suggestions, and that was one thing we did, I guess, did discuss with DNR, and I'm willing to, if there's an amendment that we need to put forth with some guide rails around that. Obviously, like I said, when I introduced this, it was the beginning of the term, and I'm kind of a free market economist that and believe in individual rights, so that you should be able to assess on your own whatever is best and good for your area. But, if there is some credible, I guess, reasoning or explanation for why we should do a poundage per food plot, I'm agreeable and open to that consideration as well.
One quick follow-up, if I may. I appreciate that, and I do think that we all need to be cognizant here on this committee as we work forward to come into an agreement with the NRC and the Department of Natural Resources. Our farmers are taking a beating right now. We have a huge reduction right now in the lines of licenses in deer take in the state of Michigan. My friend that is a farmer, everything is science now inside that combine, and he can actually tell you in the outside rows of per acre what he loses because of deer eating his crop, and he's looking for any option of what we can do to pull those deer away from his fields. So fully support what you're doing here. Excited that our chair would bring this up, and we'll do everything in our power to help you move forward so that we can come to some agreement here in the state to bring this back statewide. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, and I would just add too, it's not even just sometimes the eating of the crops, but I had a constituent send me a text, I think it was July 1st of August, in the midst of wheat harvest, and he said, I've never had so much damage. It's not that they were eating the wheat, but they're bedding because it's a prime area. And then unfortunately, before you can even sometimes see, you end up running over the fawns. And so he lost more acreage to the bedding this year, and the risk that can impose as well in a food source has become a concern as well.
Representative Bonak.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative. It's interesting, where I live, we have just the opposite problem. We have almost no deer, and it's because of predators. But I'd like to ask you, and maybe you've already touched on this, has the DNR come up with any constructive solutions that you could apply?
Well, I suggested we do a roundup, like they do out west, a cattle roundup, and we do a deer roundup, and then we haul the deer up to your area, and you can have them.
I think all it would provide is a temporary feeding for our predators.
Well,
and that would
that's,
be it.
I think that our professor, we were just discussing that before, that would it, yes, be a feasting ground for the wolves, but at least they would stop eating corn and soybeans in our community. So, yeah, they kind of laughed at me like you all did, but I mean, honestly, like, we think with science we have all the answers, and we've lost good common sense. And the common sense reality is we have way too many deer in southern Michigan, and you don't have enough deer in northern Michigan. It seems pretty simple to me. Let's load them up and move them out.
How do you think the moose get to the UP and to Isle Royal? Representative Preston.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Rep, for bringing this up today. First off, there's been a lot of questions about the DNR. I just find it completely inexcusable, the fact that they're not here today. When we were talking about license fee increases, there were a whole bunch of deals that were supposedly floated around regarding baiting and the openness to baiting, and now all of a sudden it's a closed subject that they can't talk about or even show up to a committee hearing for, and basically ignore this committee, the validity of this committee, and not show up to talk about something that's real. When you're talking about food plots, baiting, it's all relative. Prion diseases are a cervid disease. CWD is a prion disease. They're exclusive pretty much to the cervid population. Nobody can really figure out yet how it's spread. But one commonality that we have found is overpopulation is what really triggers it. And I just think it's Mother Nature's way of taking it out. But I don't know that I necessarily have a question here. It's just striking that the DNR, again, is not here in front of a committee that they should be in front of, answering questions that many on this committee have. I just really wanted that to be on the record because it's, in my mind, it's inexcusable.
Thank you. And if I could just add maybe one thought on why they may be opposed to this bill. I was texting, and I apologize for doing that, but I wanted my staffer to confirm this. But a ticket for baiting can be up to $500. So they can fine someone up to $500 for baiting. So it's, again, the financial piece, I believe, is one of the reasons that they are opposed to this legislation.
And they don't need a warrant to go find that baiting.
No, and as we know from one of our own colleagues who was ticketed for baiting and he was simply feeding deer.
And if they were here, they could simply tell us what their motivation is.
Feeding birds.
Feeding birds, not feeding deer. They thought he was feeding deer. He just was feeding the birds.
Thank you, Representative. Anybody else have anything further? Thanks again, Representative.
Yeah, thank you.
We're not going to hear, before I go to the next testimony, the DNR did turn in a card in opposition and submitted the written testimony. It's on the committee's website. I think you may have a copy. It's just they're concerned with the NRC's authority, in which Representative Wortz approached by saying that it just doesn't say when and how to ban. It's just that they can't just totally ban. So now we have Dr. Jerry Blunt from MSU, presentation on overpopulation of our deer herds. Thank you, sir. Yeah, red button there. Thank you, sir.
That works much better, thank you. Hey, I just want to first thank Chairperson Martin and members of the committee for allowing me the opportunity to speak to you this afternoon. And so, as Chairperson Martin mentioned, I'm just going to provide some remarks relative to deer abundance, overabundance, if you will, and some of the issues that are surrounding that. And so, first I want to just mention that it's important to understand the term overabundance, and what we want to realize is that it's not a scientific term, but it's a value-based term. And in the context of these remarks, we can consider it when a wildlife population exceeds some human-derived threshold of tolerance. And so specifically to white-tailed deer, it could be the amount of crop damage a producer's experiencing. It could even be the number of deer or number of times deer are observed in a crop field, the number of deer vehicle collisions, or the impact of deer herbivory on native plant communities. So consequently, because it's a value-based qualitative term, it'll vary across people what it actually means. And even within the same person, it can vary over time because it's based on numerous factors beyond the actual species abundance, in this case white-tailed deer. Now, as Representative Wortz mentioned, there's considerable evidence that white-tailed deer populations in the lower peninsula of Michigan have increased over the last several decades, but I want to make clear that there aren't any recent scientifically credible estimates of deer abundance in Michigan across large spatial extents. We simply don't have that information. However, for many species of wildlife that are managed for sustainable use, such as hunting, specific estimates or abundance or density, they're not necessarily required. Rather, using indices or trends based on harvest or the impacts of wildlife, in this case deer, on environment or society, often can be used to effectively manage these species and identify where additional management is warranted. Now, there's been an overall decline, as you're all aware, in the percentage of the U.S. population that participates in hunting. Specific to deer in Michigan, the number of deer hunters has decreased in recent decades from 758,000 in 2000, to just over 530,000 hunters in 2024. And this decline in deer hunters has corresponded with a decrease in the estimated deer harvests. In fact, in 2000, the year 2000, over 540,000 deer were killed, whereas only 373,000 deer were killed in the 2024 seasons. And so while removing antlerless deer from the population is considered the most effective harvest strategy for population management of deer, particularly if the goal is to reduce abundance, most hunters in Michigan, in fact, about 2/3 in 2024, did not purchase specifically an antlerless deer license. An antlerless harvest comprised only 44% of the total harvest in 2024. Hunters in Michigan also, on average, only take 1.2 to 1.3 deer per hunter. And so, overall, the hunter success rate is about 53% in the southern lower peninsula as of last year. And I also mentioned that of these hunters, only 7.2% of hunters in 2024 took more than 2 deer. So success rate was 53%, but very few people take more than 2 deer. And obviously, as Representative Wortz mentioned, there are exceptions, but as a rule, not many. So we don't know the relative contributions of declining harvest and land use patterns on deer abundance. However, they've undoubtedly had an impact, particularly in the southern lower peninsula. And these increased abundance estimates have resulted in a number of interactions. And one big one, as Representative Wortz mentioned, was agriculture damage. And so I'll start by saying at present, like deer abundance, there's no rigorous large-scale estimates of the economic losses to agriculture caused by white-tailed deer in Michigan. However, there's clearly losses, and these losses can be substantial, as we've heard, particularly to individual producers. But again, the overall magnitude of these losses, we just don't know. So the most relevant data I could come up with in Michigan associated with the extent of crop damage are the deer damage control permits issued by the Michigan Department of Natural Resources. And the number of tags issued under the DDCPs, or deer damage crop permits, in the lower peninsula has increased 331% over the last decade, from about 5,100 in 2015 to over 23,000 in 2024. During 2024, or last year, 10,754 deer were reported taken under these permits across the lower peninsula, with an average harvest per county of 158, but that ranged up to 1,118 deer in a single county. The permits and associated harvests have increased at a greater rate throughout the lower peninsula since 2019. So they've been increasing overall, but in the last 5 years, they've increased even more rapidly, especially in the southern lower. And most of these permits are issued in the east central counties like Sanilac, Tuscola, and Saginaw counties, likely in part because of the amount of agriculture in these counties. But the percentage of deer harvested under these permits has remained relatively constant. So in 2015, 49% of the tags issued were filled, and in 2024, 46%. So the number of permits have increased, and the number of deer taken under these permits have increased, but the actual percent or proportion of the permits tags issued each year has remained about the same. So one might assume the increase in deer harvested under these permits reflects a corresponding increase in deer abundance. You know, an increase in the extent of the problem and amount of damage over these years certainly could have occurred, and very likely has. However, a greater awareness of the program, shifting tolerances toward deer markets and other factors could also influence permit allocation. So what I'm meaning by this is it's not to say that the issue has not increased, but there's also other factors that have, and so we can't use the deer damage control permits as a direct measure of increased severity of crops. That's my point there. When thinking about deer abundance and societal impacts, it's also important to consider deer vehicle collisions. In recent years, Michigan's ranked in the top 5 states nationally in number of deer vehicle collisions and was ranked 3rd by State Farm Insurance in 2024. Michigan averaged 62,000 deer vehicle collisions annually from 2012 to 2023, as reported by the Michigan Office of Highway Safety Planning. And this is a big deal. These collisions have resulted in over 15,000 human injuries, 135 deaths, and more than $3 billion in damages, which represents more than $300 million in damages annually if we assume $5,000 per deer vehicle collision per the Michigan Department of Insurance and Financial Services. In a recent study we conducted in the Lower Peninsula from 2012 to 2023, we identified relationships of percent agriculture, specifically cultivated cropland, and deer harvest at the county level, with deer vehicle collisions. And what we found is that once the percentage of cultivated crops at the county level exceeded 11%, deer vehicle collisions also increased. We also found that once harvests reached 12 to 15 deer per square mile, deer vehicle collision rates stabilized. And what this does is broadly links higher deer abundance to agriculture, as is no surprise. And that harvest, if increased compared to current levels, has the potential to reduce deer vehicle collisions. And similarly, a study that came out last year from Indiana basically found a similar result, that increasing recreational harvest could reduce deer vehicle collisions. And that concludes my remarks, but also I failed to mention that I'm the Boone and Crockett Chair in Wildlife Conservation at Michigan State University and work a lot with large mammal ecologies, sustainable use of wildlife, including hunting and harvest management. And so, thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. Just before I forget, there is a live report for the DNR harvest for deer. Now, I will say that last year it was 40 cents below what actual is harvested, the loading of it. But right now we sit at about 250,000 deer harvested. While we're sitting here, 3 more deer were taken in Sanilac, or reported out of Sanilac County. The 2 counties with more than 7,000 deer harvested this season, total, all seasons, are the only 2 above 7,000 is Saginaw and Sanilac, and Saginaw being the biggest one. But I predict that after this weekend, Sanilac's going to catch up significantly. Got some friends that might help that out. I might get some cold fingers and toes doing the same thing. No, this is good, because I think it dovetails what we were analytically, are just our anecdotal, observances. We're thinking, we're thinking human beings. We see, us that commute here. I see I-69 covered with, hamburger venison every day. And the farmers and agricultural people see this all the time. The UP obviously knows about their sparsity. So I'm glad we got some of the actual details for this to own up to that. We have Vice Chair McFall has a question.
Those of us coming from Detroit also see it along 96. It's and it always scares me driving home when I can see the reflection from my lights off in the fields and stuff on the side home. So I'm sure some others have seen that as well. So I don't know if you can answer this or not, but the question that I had previously was, what I'm trying to understand is the science behind banning baiting when they don't ban if you plant something and they're all standing there eating it. What exactly is the difference for them to transmit whatever disease it is, whether it's the wasting or not? Do you know, what is the reasoning?
Well, I can't attest to any reasoning by anyone other than myself.
Right.
But my professional opinion of one difference between baiting and, say, a food plot, for example. And the other thing we have to be, I don't know, careful is not the right word, but just have to understand there's a gradient of baiting, that can range from a hunter dropping an apple on their shooting lane on the way to their stand to an individual dumping a ton of sugar beets, onto the landscape. Quite different, yet both could be considered baiting, And so thinking about baiting in terms of kind of consistent or sustained dumping of food, if you will, in a specific area over time versus a food plot, one difference would be that it's the amount and density, if you will, of the actual food. And so in a food plot, for example, it's more likely that if a deer is to take a bite of forage, that the forage would largely be removed from that specific location. If you had a 5-gallon pile of corn on the ground, a deer that took a bite from that corn and left saliva, for example, on the corn, it would be there for the next deer. And so that would be kind of a difference. And because of that, a deer could come back to that same spot, is much more likely to than in a food plot. And that increases contact rate. And there's been studies done that have demonstrated that direct and indirect contact rates in bait locations is greater than it is in food plots. And that's the predominant reason, because of that density, if you will, of forage.
Okay, all right. Because it just seems like we could have some medium here, like that there could be something where we meet in the middle on this with
Yeah,
the
and
DNR.
it is an entire gradient.
Yeah, because I mean, there's a big difference between, yeah, I can understand that, of dumping a pile of something versus, yeah. So it seems like to me that, yeah, it just feels to me like, though, that there would be where we could meet in the middle here on something. So, thank you.
You bet.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, sir, for being here. I want to focus on the harvesting of does. I believe in your testimony you said that the most effective way to decrease the deer population is to harvest more does. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's typically considered the most effective means of reducing deer abundance, if that's the goal.
Okay. And I guess my question is, if you can answer this, in states that have enacted policies that encourage more doe harvest, whether it be, you know, earn a buck or a single buck tag, did those policies lead to a decrease in deer population that you're aware of?
It's I've not seen data to support that or refute it, you know, so I'm uncertain.
Okay.
Just that Michigan has if you look at the deer harvest, we have a lower percentage of does or antlerless deer harvested than most other states, at least in the Midwest.
Okay. And I know, you know, certainly myself included, I mean, a lot of hunters focus on targeting mature bucks.
You bet.
But obviously, you know, too many does in a certain area can pose problems to that. I listen to a lot of hunting experts, and they always focus a lot on the buck to doe ratio. And if you have too many does, how that can lead to negative factors with growing big bucks. And I don't exactly know the science behind it, but I know there are benefits to harvesting more does, aside from just curving the overall population. So anyway, I just didn't know if you had looked at other states and had data to support them.
Well, to your point about buck-doe ratios, from work that we've done in the Upper Peninsula, that we found that with buck-doe ratios of 1 buck to up to 13 does, basically every adult doe was impregnated. So you can have pretty disparate ratios and still have high pregnancy rates.
Yeah, one of the factors we have, as far as does go, you know, whatever the weather conditions are for a particular season. Right now, Carl, you can correct me, there's 51 inches or more in the UP? Yeah. The western side snow belts, even over to here, we're about 40% higher in snow for November, December this time frame than in the past. If it continues, because the storm track from the El Nino type cycles in the Pacific, the storm tracks, as they continue across the lower peninsula of Michigan, and the snowfalls are deeper, that's going to limit the feeding of the deer, and maybe we won't have so many twins born, because there's been so many darn twins born in the last few years that the population's really skyrocketed. So we need a harsh winter or two to curb that also, I think. So I can't control that. Representative Preston.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your testimony today. So the Upper Peninsula has been allowing baiting for quite some time. We had very stable deer populations before the wolves really started the wolves and the black bear really started to take a toll. I think the numbers I'm hearing now is that our harvest totals are down 22%. I know in my neck of the woods where I've got my 200 acres that abuts state land, we have yet to harvest a deer, several does, but no bucks. So the UP is down, you know, statewide or UP wide, and we allow baiting. And from when we had stable populations to the populations that we have now, we've only had one anomaly in Dickinson County with CWD. I think it quickly corrected itself. And to my knowledge, we never had a run-in with any issues. And I've just on food plots, I beg to differ. I've grown some chicory plots that I would say would rival and commingle spit with the deer just as well as a corn pile. And if you're talking about legal baiting, that is, under 2 gallons, especially if it's broadcast out, I really think you're mitigating the ability for transmission, especially like on broadcast feeders and stuff like that. But I'm assuming you consider yourself a subject matter expertise on this?
It's not so much what I consider myself, it's what others consider me,
What do others consider you?
an expert.
Okay, all right. Considering that, and considering the overpopulation down here and the depopulation in the Upper Peninsula, do you feel that the Michigan DNR is properly managing Michigan's deer herd? I would like your professional opinion on that.
That's something I'm not actually prepared to answer, nor I don't feel it appropriate in this context. It's too value-based personal opinion as opposed to science. But to your earlier point about the chicory, my statement about the baiting versus the food plot is not that it's dichotomous, that is all or nothing, that it's a gradient.
There's a lot of subjectivity in that.
No, I wouldn't say it's subjectivity. I would say it's along an entire continuum, and that the food plot would be over here and the baiting over here in the form we're talking about, like the 5 gallons of corn, you know. It doesn't mean a deer will never come to the same spot twice in the food plot, but the frequency at which that would occur would be far less than it would be at a bait pile. That was my point, just to clarify.
No,
that.
and I get that, but I'm
Yeah.
saying that the relativity of it is, what if that 5 gallons is spread across 100 square feet?
Yeah, and that's something that
Which is basically how chicory is. It's
yeah, when
a
we
spread
get
out
that
forage.
nuanced, it's difficult to like quantify, because there's, like you say, there's so much gradient between that chicory plot versus a pumpkin, as we heard earlier, you know, versus 5 gallons of corn, and how that's dispersed, how frequently that's dispersed.
But you're not
You know,
you're
you
not
have-
able to give us an impression on the effectiveness of the DNR's management of the Michigan deer herd,
In what regard, sir?
just overall.
I guess that's. Can you be more specific, because that's so like
Okay,
broad and
how
general.
about considering the Lower Peninsula's overpopulation?
Overpopulation. That's I would have.
And I'm
to
talking about
add-
the ecological definition of overpopulation.
Yeah, ecological. That would be based on what we as society have as our value.
Nope, that would be based on the sustainability of the land in
But
regards to,
right.
and the habitat in regards to what's available to the deer
Mm-hmm.
to sustain them.
Yeah, and that would be a value. In my definition, what do we determine is sustainable? What conditions? What would that look like? You know, and so that'll vary. You know, I could ask each of you individually in this room what that would look like, and we'd get a slightly different answer, because it's so complicated.
We're not the experts. You are, so.
But right, and so the thing about science is to talk about the possible outcomes of value-based decisions. And so without knowing what that value is and what the associated goal would be, it's difficult to say, you know, how there's, I don't have a target to aim for to see how this would be in response to what the specific question was. if
So
that
in your
makes
mind,
sense.
it's a possibility that Lower Michigan's deer population is great right now?
Oh, it's increased, absolutely.
Is it where it should stay?
That's a value-based, and
Okay.
that, yeah,
All right.
that's values.
Thank you.
You bet.
Representative Wortz.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to go back to one of the things that you mentioned about, I guess, the food plot situation. And so I grew up on a cattle farm. I have more familiarity with cattle than I do deer in all actuality. My family just likes to hunt deer. I don't like to sit and be quiet or be cold, so I don't usually go out. But anyways, my point, I guess, in question for you. So salt blocks, mineral blocks, use all the time in cattle, okay, in feeding. They can be used in baiting deer in northern Michigan, right? But not southern Michigan in the UP. Okay. So a salt block, cattle lick off that all day long, all different cattle. and we don't see significant spread of disease unless there's some sort of an outbreak. But we allow that to happen, okay?
Yep.
And that, I would say, is even more, I mean, if you're licking off of this and then I lick off, that's literally saliva to saliva,
Yeah.
okay? And we don't see spread of disease within a herd unless there's some sort of an outbreak. So when I look at the scientific classification of cattle and deer, they're in the same kingdom, the same phylum, the same class, the same order, and the same suborder. They're only different in genus species, but they're both hoofed animals, and they're very closely related then, and hence why bovine tuberculosis, which is traditionally found in cattle, has spread to deer, correct? So my argument then, or question is, so I think we kind of refute the theory of saliva to saliva spread if cattle can lick off the same salt block as can deer in the UP and not have spread of disease being elevated or visibly noticeable. What would be the difference? Even if we say we dump a pile of corn, but most bait is either spread or in some sort of a containment type
Yeah.
thing, okay? So the likelihood of saliva contact that would create a spread of disease by just an open dumping of corn is quite limited. Would you agree with that?
For saliva,
Yes.
yeah, if I'm understanding you correctly, if it's like they adequately dispersed such that it's not repeated sampling of the same site, I would
Well, I'm
expect that
saying
would
even
reduce.
if it was, if deer can lick off the same salt block or lick off the same pile of corn, there's actually more likelihood they're gonna contaminate each other on a salt block versus a pile of corn, right?
Probably.
And we allow salt blocks as a legal baiting mechanism in northern Michigan, in the UP, just not in
yeah.
lower.
And not in the lower.
Does that help answer your science question a little bit? Yeah, thank you.
Representative Johnson, do you have a question? Oh, we'll cancel that then. I thought so.
Thank you. You know, thank you so much for your
Gotcha.
expertise today. In your expert opinion, if we continue on the trajectory we're already on with Lower Peninsula, deer population versus cars, deer population versus hunters, if we continue in the direction we're already going, in 5 years, do you think we'll be better off or worse off?
If we maintain the current management paradigm, if you will,
Yeah.
in 5 years, I would expect some level of increase over what we're seeing today.
Increase of deer.
Likely increase of deer. At some point, density dependence will likely kick in and populations will asymptote or kind of level off or, kind of fluctuate like that. But I'd be surprised if we're there 100% in the Lower Peninsula today. So I would expect some level of increase. How much I couldn't
So
say.
worse off. Thank you very much.
You bet.
Representative Wortz.
Adding to that question that she just asked about herd management, so in the county I live in, we've had 10,000 acres that has gone to solar panels, arrays, and are all fenced in now. So can you speak to that a little bit about how is that going to affect if we have this population of deer that we're not managing, but now we've taken 10,000 acres of access away from them? How's that going to affect?
It's kind of hard to answer, actually, but if you, I guess you're talking at the county level. If you've excluded deer from, 12 square miles, 15 square miles of land, at least temporarily, the density in other areas will increase,
And crop damage will increase.
Potentially, yeah, depending on how things are juxtaposed.
A lot of things have been mentioned about baiting and feeding, how it could spread disease and so forth. Is there any, I know among the deer farmers, there's some genetic stuff they've done to work out CWD, but is there any vaccination, any disease control that you know of that for the wild deer herd that we've been working on or might be coming out in the future, near future?
Well, there's a lot of work being done towards not only developing for CWD, rapid tests, if you will, and also some limited work at, solutions to reducing the prevalence of it within an individual deer. But that's not really my area of expertise at all, and so.
I thought you might be more in a peer group than I would be for information on that, so I thank you for that.
But there's really nothing out there that way.
I believe that's all the questions we had. Thank you very much for all the
Okay.
information.
Well, thank you so much for your
Appreciate
time.
it. Thanks for coming out. As Representative Wortz mentioned, the Farm Bureau did put in written testimony in support of the bill. Okay, Representative McFall moves to excuse absent members. There being no objection, the motion prevails by unanimous consent. We plan to meet next week on December 17th. There being no further business before the committee will stand adjourned.